Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Brad Musil, and this is a reading of The Utility of Religion, Mill, Nietzsche, and James. This will be part one of chapter two, Friedrich Nietzsche and the Antichrist. Again, this is part one, Introduction. In Being and Time, Martin Heidegger argues that a human being is, quote, distinguished by the fact that, in its very being, that being is an issue for it, end quote. Footnote 214 cites the source. The implication is that it is human nature to ponder our own existence and to question why we are here. At one point or another, most of us have wondered why there is something instead of nothing. That is, why does anything exist at all? Life, as they say, is a mystery. In response, some seek to unravel the mystery, to seek the truth, via philosophical questions, and some who do this are left feeling unsatisfied, and sometimes even hopeless as a result. I think Heidegger has it right. It seems that, at least to some degree, almost all human beings are concerned with these kinds of existential issues and feel this kind of existential anxiety at one point or another during their lives. As self-conscious beings, we reflect on our existence and grow anxious in doing so, with thoughts of death and suffering and a sense of meaninglessness plaguing us at times. This, in turn, can create psychological distress and a need for relief. As I mentioned in chapter 1, many have suggested that religion is a kind of antidote for these existential ailments, offering a sense of relief through the answers it provides for life's big questions. Like William James, the subject of chapter 3, they believe religion satisfies a basic psychological need of human beings by relieving them of the existential anxieties inherent in their earthly existence as self-conscious beings. Similarly, in his well-known work, The Future of an Illusion, Sigmund Freud illustrates the manner in which he thinks religion satisfies our desire to free ourselves from existential helplessness. Freud captures the point as follows, quote, how does he, man, defend himself against the superior powers of nature, of fate, which threaten him as they threaten all the rest? Man's self-regard, seriously menaced, calls for consolation. Life and the universe must be robbed of their terrors. End quote. Footnote 215 cites the source. Footnote 216. Freud likens this sense of powerlessness to quote the similar state of helplessness end quote in a child's relationship to his or her parents, as the child quote had reason to fear them end quote, and I cite the source there, just as human beings fear the power of nature and fate. End of footnote 216. Naturally, Freud concludes human beings are compelled to respond to their existential terror in one way or another. Quote, a reaction which is precisely the formation of religion, end quote. Footnote 217 cites the source. Thus, given this ever-present need for a sense of purpose and the perpetual existential dread that can otherwise define being human, religion is often advocated on behalf of the existential relief it provides to believers. However, in his book The Antichrist, Friedrich Nietzsche staunchly rejects this stance, arguing that religious belief comes at an extreme price, a price that more than offsets any of its benefits. Much like Plato, Nietzsche is renowned for his artistic style, and what's more, each of his works seems to have a unique feel. Some of his books resemble traditional philosophical treatises, for example, The Birth of Tragedy, while others consist entirely of aphorisms, for example, Beyond Good and Evil, or read like an epic, for example, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. All in all, he wrote 14 books before succumbing to mental illness in January of 1889, after which he spent the last 10 years of his life in asylums or under the care of his mother and sister. The Antichrist was the second to last of these 14 books, and in the following I examine the arguments that Nietzsche advances in this work regarding the utility of religion. Although Nietzsche is well known for being critical of prior thinkers, there were some who significantly influenced him. It is worth noting here that many of his chief philosophical ideas, not to mention his own writing style as evidenced by his use of aphorisms, were inspired by the philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer, 1788 to 1860, whom I have already referenced in chapter 1, and about whom I will say much more later in this chapter, as well as in chapter 3. Schopenhauer was a German philosopher whose writing Nietzsche discovered by chance in a bookstore at the age of 21, and much of Nietzsche's own philosophy can be seen as an objection to Schopenhauer's pessimism and nihilistic tendencies, or an endorsement of Schopenhauer's use of aphorisms and critical philosophy. As Robert Wicks suggests in his Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on Nietzsche, quote, Schopenhauer's atheistic and turbulent vision of the world, in conjunction with his highest praise of music as an art form, captured Nietzsche's imagination, and the extent to which the cadaverous perfume of Schopenhauer's worldview continued to permeate Nietzsche's mature thought remains a matter of scholarly debate, end quote. Footnote 218 cites the source. Lest there be any doubt lest there be any doubt that Nietzsche himself felt at least at some point in his life a debt of gratitude to Schopenhauer, one need only consider that Schopenhauer is the often praised subject of the third essay of his Untimely Meditations. 4 essays comprise this early work of Nietzsche's. Regarding the third and fourth essays, Wicks writes, quote, the third and fourth studies on Schopenhauer and Wagner, respectively, address how these two thinkers, as paradigms of philosophic and artistic genius, hold the potential to inspire a stronger, healthier, and livelier German culture. These celebratory studies on Schopenhauer and Wagner, reveal how, as a recurring feature of Nietzsche's thought, he presents us with some higher type of character. He offers different models of heroic characters as the years go by, as an ideal towards which he would have his best readers aspire. End quote. Footnote 219 cites the source. As Wicks suggests, Nietzsche thinks, at least during the early stages of his philosophical career, that Schopenhauer demonstrates some of the characteristic traits he associates with strong characters, whom in turn he juxtaposes with weak characters, which, as we shall soon discover, most religious individuals turn out to be on his account. Interestingly, we will see that Schopenhauer also possesses some weak characteristics too. In The Antichrist, a book consisting of 62 aphorisms, Nietzsche develops many criticisms of one religion in particular, Christianity. Accordingly, when characterizing Nietzsche's project in the book, Wicks writes, quote, Nietzsche expresses his disgust over the way noble values in Roman society were corrupted by the rise of Christianity, and he discusses specific aspects and personages in Christian culture, the Gospels, Paul, the martyrs, priests, the Crusades, with a view towards showing that Christianity is a religion for weak and unhealthy people, whose general historical effect has been to undermine the healthy qualities of the more noble cultures. End quote. Footnote 220 cites the source. However, while Nietzsche focuses almost exclusively on Christianity throughout the book, most of his criticisms are equally applicable to other religions, and I will note the few instances where this does not seem to be the case. Footnote 221. For example, I will allude to Christian misery in Part 4, which Nietzsche explicitly juxtaposes with Buddhistic cheerfulness. Hence, this suggests that depression and misery are problems that Nietzsche thinks only apply to some religions. End of footnote 221. Moreover, Nietzsche does apply many of these same points to other religions more explicitly in his other works, and I will mention some examples as I proceed. Interestingly, Nietzsche originally intended for the book to be the first of a major 4-part project he called the, quote, revaluation of all values, end quote, a project I will say much more about in Part 5. However, upon completing The Antichrist, he decided that he had more or less completed his goals with the project's first installment. Footnote 222 cites the source. The Antichrist offers a summation of his core philosophical beliefs regarding religion, and to a lesser extent morality, which for the most part he had already expressed, albeit with less vitriol, in previous works. This sense of Nietzsche rehashing what he had said before, coupled with the fact that Nietzsche can easily come across as being a bit belligerent in much of the text, leads many, both Nietzsche enthusiasts and critics alike, to view the work in a generally unfavorable light. Thus, in the introduction to Judith Norman's translation to the text, Aaron Ridley writes, quote, the Antichrist strikes one as over-emphatic and rather tiring, end quote. Footnote 223 cites the source. Nevertheless, the Antichrist offers Nietzsche's most mature views regarding religion, as well as, in my opinion, his most thorough and compelling case against it. Familiarity with other essential elements of Nietzsche's philosophy, many of which he begins to develop very early on in his writing career, is required if one hopes to understand and appreciate his criticisms of religion in the Antichrist. While he doesn't focus on articulating and developing them in the Antichrist, although he does still reference them, concepts like nihilism and master and slave moralities underlie most of his criticisms of religion therein, and understanding these underlying concepts is therefore beneficial in adequately following his objections. Consequently, before analyzing Nietzsche's criticisms of religion, I will provide context by discussing some important elements of his more general philosophy. I begin by detailing Nietzsche's thoroughly naturalistic philosophy, Part 2, highlighting in particular his famous reflections on master and slave moralities, his amoralism, and his reductionist ontology. I suggest that Nietzsche's thoroughgoing naturalism is the primary precipitator of his criticisms of religion. Next, I outline what I think are the two major problems Nietzsche has with religions. One, they are at odds with an honest concern for the truth, part 3, and two, they are unhealthy, part 4. Then I characterize Nietzsche's solution to the problems he associates with religion, his project of a revaluation of all values, part 5. Finally, in part 6, I conclude by voicing some concerns I have regarding what is arguably, granting some of Nietzsche's own points, the most likely outcome of this project, a project that takes a metaphorical hammer to the foundation of all traditional values, including those most closely associated with religion. Specifically, I consider the possibility that, in doing away with what Nietzsche considers to be the fabrications of Christianity, and with religious ideals in general, beliefs Nietzsche himself associates with, quote, life-preserving errors, end quote, footnote 224 cites the source, we might actually be undermining our prospects for living a healthy life. Given his own emphasis on facilitating healthy lives and combating nihilism, which is unhealthy, there is good reason to think that this would be of utmost concern to Nietzsche himself. Again, that was part 1, introduction of chapter 2, Friedrich Nietzsche and the Antichrist, from Utility of Religion, Mill, Nietzsche, and James. Thanks.